Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jessica Lee with Church Leaders, and I am here with Jon Dunwell, State Representative from Iowa. Representative Dunwell, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So I'd love to start off. I understand that you're a pastor. Your website says you have 25 years experience in ministry leadership, and I would just love to hear a little bit about your background as a pastor and what led you into ministry.
Absolutely. So I'm part of the Christian and Missionary Alliance. And so I pastored 4.5 years in Minnesota in a church plant. And then I did somewhat of redevelopment work in Orlando, Florida, in which I was there 21 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
then I had a passion to get engaged in really doing redevelopment, church transition work, but I wanted some business experience and background. So I left formal ministry. I had been doing executive coaching kind of as a hobby as a pastor. And I went into the business world for just now 11 years. I was supposed to only be 10, but I ended up doing 11 years. And now I'm fully back into the nonprofit world where I work for some different ministries, but also pastor church I started at. I've been doing transition work, but I started at a church just 2 months ago that's in some, I would say, some redevelopment phases in Monroe, Iowa here.
Okay. So how long have you served as a representative in Iowa? And could you speak a little bit about how you got into politics?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in ministry in Orlando, Florida, I was pretty actively involved in my community. I was part of a very large underserved community of Orlando called Pine Hills.
Okay.
Lots of issues. And so I was always engaged in whether it be local politics and just being a supporter and encourager, working with politicians. I was the senior chaplain in the Orange County Sheriff's Office, overseeing 40 chaplains, member of the Pine Hills Community Council, helped start a couple Ys, part of the Metro Y board. So when I left Orlando, we moved to Newton, Iowa, just outside of Des Moines here. I kind of brought that same passion of just being engaged. And one of the areas I got more engaged in was in politics. And so I was helping other people run over the last few years. And in an effort to make a difference in my community, there was an opportunity. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to throw my name in the hat. And so I lost my first election, but
Okay.
we weren't supposed to even come close. We were supposed to be soundly defeated. And we almost beat the incumbent. And so after 1 year of him in that term, he resigned. And so there was a special election, and then I won that election. So that was a 1 year fulfillment of a 2 year term. And then I won re-election a year ago. And so we served 2 years in the Iowa House. So this will be my upcoming third session. I'm an assistant majority leader in the House. So I was elected by my fellow colleagues to be one of the leaders in the House. And it's a challenging, but also very rewarding and engaging experience to be in the Iowa House. Representative democracy is well alive on the state level. It's amazing how alive and well it is in the state level. So.
Okay. So could you, before we get into kind of the news from the week, could you generally explain your perspective on religious liberty and then specifically how your Christian beliefs shape your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love talking about that. So when I talk about religious liberties, I really believe strongly in the First Amendment and the idea that, when you take a look at our Constitution, it's a process document. It really is focused on how we go about making laws. So legislatures can make laws, they express values. But when you come to the Bill of Rights, it says you can only go so far. There are some things you really have to be careful with. And so when it comes to the Bill of Rights, those amendments, the first, second, et cetera, we talk about, we have to really approach them from a liberal perspective as much as possible. Realize there's messiness on the edges of that. And so we have to realize part of what the First Amendment talks about is freedom of religious expression. And the greatest thing I'm afraid of is when government comes in and begins to be the arbitrator of what is an appropriate religious expression and what's not an appropriate religious expression. That scares the dickens out of me. That means we're giving up freedom, and someday it's going to be used against us. I mean, right now we're looking at this, not to pick on the Biden administration, but they're trying to pass some new rules about the type of foster parents you can be if you have some religious beliefs that are in contrary, or it's a Christian organization that's working with foster kids and maybe prohibiting that religious organization from being engaged and involved. So those are extreme examples, but it's coming in right now. And so I don't want government picking and choosing religious expression. I want freedom. And so that's extremely important to me, not only as an American, but it's very important to me as a believer. When it comes to my faith, and this is the part that I've been struggling with all week long, Jessica, and I've had, it's, we've had the moral majority. We've had this conservative movement that I'm part of. And I work for organizations that engage people in the church to get involved. But my concern is this. We want to get people to have a seat at the table. So everyone of faith, everyone who believes in Jesus Christ, just like I do, I want to say, hey, don't forget, our Constitution says you can have the seat at the table in decision making. You get to be part of the discussion. You get to express your values, your ideas. You get to do it. But remember, everyone else gets a seat at the table too. And it's in that process of engaging back and forth. And that may be someone who doesn't share your faith. That may be someone who has a different faith than you, who's going to be part of that discussion. But it is through the process we come up with what our values, our laws are going to be. And so I'm greatly concerned that, yes, I want my faith very much as someone who's part of the kingdom of God to influence the world in which I find myself. And so I bring all that I am to every decision that I make. I'm a follower of Jesus, so all that comes with me and in my values and decisions that I make. But what I want to also say in terms of that is I want to influence government and influence the values and the direction of my state. But what I don't want to do is try to say I demand that my state be defined by my Christianity. And so I'm concerned about what I see out there. And this thing that has gone viral on my tweet, that went over to 5 million people, which just was my statement about how I was approaching this as a legislature and as a follower of Christ. I found just astounding what came back at me. And this, what I would call, and I'm not an expert on it, Christian nationalism scared me to death. I mean, I'm talking, my eyes have been opened, and the imagery of crusades and sword, people telling me prayer doesn't have any power and the armor of God isn't really where it's at, but we need to be actually drawing the sword and destroying things. And, don't be an effeminate Christian is the words I got back at me over and over. Yeah.
Well, okay. And so to explain for people who might not be aware of what you're talking about is, for the past week, you've been under fire for defending the religious rights of a group called the Satanic Temple. They erected a holiday display at the Iowa State Capitol building, and a lot of Christians found the display offensive. It featured a figure known as Baphomet with a goat's head on a human body, and obviously there's the word satanic in the Satanic Temple. And I do want to state that the Satanic Temple is a non-theistic group, so they don't worship Satan. They're not, practicing supernatural rituals or something, but they are a religious organization, and under the IRS, they're recognized as having tax-exempt status. And, to your point, you've been saying they have, as such, the same rights and protections under the Constitution as other religious groups do. And many people have been unhappy about that. So I don't know, you've kind of gotten into it a little bit, but maybe if you want to kind of explain what that's been like for you this week with this situation specifically and some of the responses you've gotten from people.
Yeah. So as I was saying, is what I did was what I always do as a legislator of getting a lot of questions about why in the world this was allowed at the Capitol.
Right.
So I explained to people, hey, by the way, any religious group can petition to have a display up for 2 weeks in the Capitol. The Capitol is controlled by the legislature. We allow the Department of Administration Services to manage that in keeping with code. And so I just put up my policy. Here's how it happened. Here's my perspective as a legislator. Here's my perspective as a follower of Christ. And I mean, I just can't believe how angry people were. They felt that my responsibility was to go in there and physically tear it down. They felt my responsibility was to say Christianity is the religion that's recognized in America. Every other faith should not be recognized. There was, attacks on who I am as a person. I can't tell you the number of people that damned me to hell. I mean, that's a pretty strong assessment of that. Questioned my faith, threw A.W. Tozer, because I'm part of the Christian Missionary Alliance, at me and said A.W. Tozer would never allow this, and put quotes from A.W. Tozer up there. And it was just, unbelievable attack. Threatened me from, you're not going to get reelected. We're going to rally people up in your district to go against you.
And this was despite, like, you used words even like horrible and evil. Like, you were very clear to people that
Correct.
You found it objectionable as a Christian at the same time. So you weren't even hiding that. You were just, saying that constitutionally this is a protected right.
And Jessica, what's interesting is, so I got criticized for mentioning the Constitution. Now, in all of my posts, I talk about the Constitution as an American, but I also talk about the Bible and my belief as a follower of Christ. So my objection, you can take the Constitution out of it. I haven't changed my objections. Does that make sense to trying to remove it? Meaning I believe this is also the Christian way. So people just got upset and said the Constitution is dead. You shouldn't be even following the Constitution. You're putting the Constitution above Jesus. And that's a bad thing. And they misquoting Scripture. If I get one more time, and so I'd say we've got to follow the way of Jesus on this, which is more in terms of Paul's admonition to put on the armor of God, or Jesus' admonitions in the Beatitudes and Sermon on the Mount, or washing each other's feet, or loving, or prayer and spiritual warfare. And people said, nope, none of that works. You are the reason our country. Those types of things are what got us to the place where we are today, that allows that to be there. And I'm going, you're telling me that you believe that prayer can't move mountains? You're telling me that the best way to engage in spiritual warfare is actually through a physical confrontation with an inanimate object, than praying against what may be someone praying against who probably not from that organization, but maybe someone was taking that. So that was the part that was shocking to me, is people have said, I've lost hope in the Constitution, and I've lost hope in the way of Jesus. And the images are Jesus overturning tables in the Gospel of John and elsewhere in the temple. The imageries are the Crusades. The images is Saint Boniface, who cut down a tree and of worship. The images are Romans, a total misunderstanding of Romans 13, and writing of that, you are, as a representative, a God's minister. Or not realizing, wait a second, Paul was writing that to people to respect authority, a pagan Roman government authority, and saying it may be pagan, but God uses that to, I say, in summary, keep evil in check. But they were misquoting it and using it as, you are called to be a minister of good, which means you are called to promote the gospel, promote Christianity, and gospel and Christianity only. And therefore, you have a responsibility to tear down that display as a minister of good, because according to Romans 13. So bizarre stuff.
Well, and speaking of tearing it down, somebody did that yesterday, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I actually had a caucus meeting yesterday. So caucus meetings are where we have sessions starting January 8th and run through mid-April. So we have pre-caucus where my party all gathers together to talk about agenda. So we were all at the Capitol. So that morning, someone from Mississippi, who he's running for office, he is, at least looks like by his words, he's a Christian nationalist. And this was a way to grab some headlines. And so he came and tore it down. Now, he was charged. It's a crime for what he did in the Capitol.
Right. So and correct me if any of these details are wrong, I didn't see that he had called himself a Christian nationalist, but I think he called himself a conservative Christian.
Yeah.
Went to the Navy Reserves as an instructor pilot.
And I appreciate that clarification, Jessica. Maybe other people have called him that. I don't want to. Can I just make one comment before you go on?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And that's why I appreciate your pushback a little. You didn't push back, but you know what I'm saying. When I'm on Twitter, I'm very careful not to go after people personally. It's about the statements. So it's not, an extreme example, it's not you're stupid. It would be more along the lines of, I find that what you said to be inane, or, you know what I'm talking about? There's a difference, though.
Right.
You don't go after people we talk, we go after what they say, and that's what's the hardest part in our discussion and dialogue in politics and Christianity today. Everything is personal. Everything is going after the character of the person.
Right, right. So he vandalized. So there's been a fundraising campaign for his legal costs that's already raised over $20,000, and on the page for it, it says he pushed over and decapitated the statue and put the head in a trash can. And I saw the Satanic Temple has decided to allow the display to remain vandalized as it is, I guess.
They took away the statue.
Oh, they did.
Oh, it's there is the base and the candles. And by the way, it comes down today. So It was down. It's down already. So everything's allowed for 2 weeks. Now, here's the fun part and I even got criticized for this. So I said, one of my tweets said something along the lines of, hey, I understand why we Christians get a little bit upset during the Christmas season that this display would be up. But I'm reminded that, the enemy thought his greatest victory was going to be the crucifixion of Jesus. But God turned the tables and created the resurrection. And here we have this thing up. And what was so beautiful is on Tuesday, I was part of a ceremony where 200 people gathered together for an hour and a half and filled it with worship and praise. And we put the nativity up, and we'll get to have that up for 2 weeks. And so it actually brought people out to, just remind people it's a choice here in America. It's a choice as a believer in God that we get a chance to praise Jesus.
One other comment I wanted to make about the vandalism is just he spoke to an outlet where he said that this came from, he was taking a stand against blasphemy. So this directly came from his convictions as a Christian, where he believed he was opposing blasphemy by destroying the statue. So you kind of shared your thoughts and comments on that, I think. Do you have any other comments on the vandalism itself?
Well, it's just, I'm concerned about conservatives, pastors, Christians saying that what he did is heroic. Mm-hmm. First off, I don't find it, Jessica, heroic, other than he wasted a good amount of time driving from Mississippi here to do this. It kind of scares me that someone would actually drive that far to do that. Mm-hmm. But number two, are we saying that if I find something I disagree with, that I dislike, that I know is not part of my faith, that my response needs to be violence?
Right.
So I take that to the extreme. I mean, if someone does something, do I deck them? That's objectionable to Christ. I mean, what does that mean? How does that play out? And how does that match the way of Christ that I believe we're called to? And so every time I raise that, they call me a boomer. Now, I know that's a slang term. First off, I'm not a boomer by age. I just missed it a little bit. But I find it interesting in saying basically that's a wrong way of looking at Jesus. He's a muscular Jesus. He's an aggressive Jesus. He's the Jesus that sat down and made a cord of whips and drove people out of the temple. That's the Jesus that they want, that is the Crusades, and they celebrate the Crusades, at least from an imagery standpoint.
Okay. Well, so last question. There's a lot of ways, I think, in which our cultural moment is unique and challenging. Do you have any encouragement or exhortation to Christians in the United States, just as we're closing out, especially in your capacity as a pastor? What would be some encouragements to people during a challenging time?
Understand that we're not just called to stand for righteousness. We are called to behave in a righteous manner. I even feel my role in the Iowa House there's plenty of other people who can rail against the schools and rail against society and pass laws that in many ways I agree with. Mm-hmm. But I keep reminding people over and over again, it's not just about what we do, it's about how we do it as well. So we have to look at the way of Jesus and ask ourselves the question, if I'm protesting something, how do I protest this in a way that shows honor to Jesus? How does this, in one sense, wash another person's feet? How does this come off as offering hospitality, not just mere tolerance, but hospitality of love and care for those I disagree with? And so we as pastors probably need to be careful in the pulpit. Can I share one more thing? This is right to it.
Absolutely.
Jessica, part of the challenge is both political parties are using existential arguments for the campaign. We've been doing it for years, and it gets worse. We're basically saying, hey, you elect my person or you're going to get Hitler. you elect my person, or the world's coming to an end. And if we keep doing that from the pulpit, or at least around the pulpit as believers and followers of Christ, we're going to lead to extreme behavior. So that language that keeps talking about the world's coming to an end if our guy doesn't win, if we don't win this argument, is going to continue to lead to extreme behavior. Because if the extreme reality is the world's coming to an end, then people will begin to behave like that.
Okay.
So we're contributing to it as pastors sometimes.
So don't use the extreme language, the Hitler language.
Yep.
Because it leads to extreme behavior. And
talk about the manner in which we engage, not just what we're engaging on.
Well, Representative Dunwell, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas.